The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Senator Elizabeth Warren is adding her name to Bernie Sanders' single-payer health care bill. Last week, I told you California Democratic Senator Kamala Harris would be co-sponsoring Bernie's Medicare for All bill, a bill that is apparently going to be ready very, very soon. I still said I think it's the right decision. I support that. But I still mostly see Kamala Harris as a tool of corporations and Democratic Party insiders. And I also said the focus now should be getting Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, and Elizabeth Warren to sign on in support of Bernie Sanders' bill, since they've said they support the idea, but hadn't yet said we will specifically support Bernie's bill. Elizabeth Warren is signing on. She wrote an email to supporters expressing to them that they should sign a petition showing their support for Bernie's upcoming Medicare for All legislation. This is fantastic. This is terrific. Let's get Cory Booker and Kirsten Gillibrand on board. But I do want to issue a sort of caveat or a warning. I do want to prepare you for something, Pat. I know you're very, very anxious about this bill. I read a few reports based on knowledge of Bernie's bill preparation that it's not really going to be a single-payer bill. I hope that this is not the case, but what I've read is it's actually going to be a multi-payer bill with significantly increased subsidies, but it's not really going to be Medicare with no minimum age limit. And I don't even want to speculate as to the details or as to why that might be. I'm withholding judgment. When we get the bill, I will analyze the bill. I have the highest hopes for the bill, but I've now read that in a couple of different places, and I'm kind of bummed out and preparing myself for the idea that it might not just be a Medicare for all proposal.
This is news to me now. Maybe it's because the American healthcare system as it is so complex that they think that this would be the most logistically plausible way to push it forward.
I don't know.
Have the best chance at passing.
I wish I could tell you, and at this point it's all speculation. I can't wait to see the bill. We will analyze the bill in detail when we get it. But still, 3 senators now supporting an upcoming healthcare for all bill. That's still good. The stronger the momentum behind the bill, the better. This is probably the strongest actual Senate support for something like this, even though we don't have the details, that I can ever remember.
It makes sense, though, that Elizabeth Warren is doing it because I think she even self-describes as the second most progressive senator.
Yeah.
And I'm just a little bit salty, though, because now she's endorsing Bernie Sanders.
I know. When we talked about it, that there's that crazy, I don't want to rehash it because I get bummed out every time I think about it, but Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks interviewed her and said, so if you basically align with Bernie on policy, why didn't you support him during the primary? And Elizabeth Warren gave this bogus non-answer. And I like Elizabeth Warren. We've had her in our studio. I've interviewed her. Doesn't mean I'm not going to call someone out when I think that they're wrong. And her bizarre non-answer on that, and you can check out that video clip. A lot of people like that video clip. I call it like I see it. And it was a bizarre non-explanation that she gave. You remember that story, right?
Oh, I do remember that story. And it was pretty transparent what the actual reason was, because she expected Hillary Clinton to win the primaries and probably wanted to position herself well in that administration, even be the VP. Some
version of that seems to be the most likely, yeah. So, yeah, kind of a bummer. But in any case, really great. Now 3 senators supporting Bernie's upcoming bill. Now all we need is the bill. Great. Hopefully next week we can analyze it. We'll take a break. We'll take your calls and a lot of other great stuff coming up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Brenda Thomas. Brenda, thank you so much for supporting our program. It really does mean a lot to me, and we are funded by viewers and listeners like Brenda. You can get the bonus show and the full show every day as a member at davidpakman.com/membership, as a patron at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow as well. And of course, if you ever shop on Amazon.com. I would encourage you to go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before shopping, because that will then send us a kickback every time you buy something. Let's go to the phones, 617-830-4750. Why don't we start with our caller from the 410 area code? Caller from 410, we've got a slightly different phone system today. Can you hear me? Can we hear you? Let's start with that.
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. What's your name? Where are you calling from? And feel free to go right into your question.
All right. My name is Matt. I'm calling from Baltimore, and I wanted to ask you a question about academic ethics, since you're a professor now.
Right.
I've noticed that there have been a lot of academic pundits around who have kind of been talking outside of their areas of expertise. And I don't necessarily want to get into people like Jordan Peterson, who are maybe arguably within their realm, but someone like Brett Weinstein recently has been kind of going on a lot about postmodern philosophy and all that sort of stuff, whereas he seems to have no background in this whatsoever. And I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on, whether it's appropriate for a biology professor to be giving lectures on postmodern philosophy.
Well, listen, here's the thing. There's sort of two answers to this, right? There's no doubt that some of these sort of celebrity professors who do something that goes viral, all of a sudden they start speaking out about whatever, and it's not their area of expertise. At the same time, I don't want to be sort of that elitist leftist who says unless you have formal education at the highest level, then you can't speak publicly on a particular issue, right? So I think it's important to just analyze each person individually and say, well, are they making sense? And we can take their credentials into consideration. I don't think someone should be banned from speaking. You know, if a school wants to invite, and Brett Weinstein's been speaking a lot at schools, being invited. If a school wants to invite Brett Weinstein to speak about whatever, right? Astronomy, I mean, whatever it is, if that's what they want to do and they believe there's an audience for it, then hey, all power to them. But I think it's sort of incumbent upon the consumer of those speeches to figure out, hey, does this person know what they're talking about? One other example, Matt, and this is not so academic, is the dude that was fired from Google, James Damore, for that memo that he wrote. He's appearing everywhere now as some kind of expert on everything from gender to, I don't know if he's spoken about postmodernism or whatever, but I watched 10 minutes of an interview he did, and I was thinking, how is this guy now being invited to talk about this stuff? Wasn't he like an IT guy, an engineer of some kind at Google? So I know what you mean, but I'm not going to be the one to say who should and shouldn't be allowed to speak,
Well, can I ask you a follow-up?
Yeah.
Do you think it's incumbent on the universities or the media outlets, et cetera, to at least provide some sort of context for what they're discussing? Like if, for example, Brett Weinstein, just to go back to him, is giving a lecture on postmodernism, at least provide some kind of references or materials for the audience so they can decide whether he's got a point or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of up to the school. I think certainly that whoever organizes the talk should be clear about what the credentials are of the person. And then if they don't include the subject of the discussion, then that should be evident. And then the audience can sort of draw their own conclusions. All right, Matt, thanks. Appreciate the call. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I have a feeling our phone system's actually working better than it ever has today. Yeah, 617-830-4750. Let's go to our next caller calling in from the 717 area code. Caller in 717, what's your name, where are you calling from, and what's on your mind today?
Hi, David. My name is Calvin, calling from Georgia. This is not the actual Georgia area code.
Okay, did you say, your volume's a little low. Did you say Kelvin?
Yeah, yep, Calvin.
Okay, good. Calvin, got it. All right, go ahead, Calvin, and speak up if you can.
Well, wow, this might sound a little disturbing, but I've been waiting for this moment for like a year.
Okay.
I mean, no, Mar-a-Lago is like sitting in the path of a huge hurricane.
I read about this. Yeah, Mar-a-Lago is in the path of Hurricane Irma, and people on Twitter are going completely bonkers. Yeah, okay, but so then what? Do you want it to be destroyed?
Well, no, because like people are talking about how we're running out of money for a federal emergency, the FEMA.
Yeah.
Yeah, running out of funds, and like if something were to happen to Mar-a-Lago, would there be like a sudden change of heart?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course there would be. I mean, listen, we've got years of experience from these Republicans who, when it's funding for some disaster that doesn't affect them, well, I'm not so sure. And when it's for their state, then all of a sudden they need the money. Although Trump has been, his decision with the debt ceiling partially was connected to making sure that there is hurricane relief funding. So it might not be Trump as the hypocrite personally in this particular case.
Gotcha. But, it's his property. So, like, he might actually, like, be able to use this as leverage to twist the arms of
who knows?
Yep. Congress.
All right, Calvin, I think we're having a connection issue. I do appreciate the call, and we will see what happens to Mar-a-Lago. You never know. Anything could happen. 617-830-4750. Let's go to our next caller. Why don't we go to our 281 caller? A caller from the 281 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from, and what's on your mind today?
Hello, my name's Jonathan, and I'm from Houston.
All right.
And I'm calling because a few days before Hurricane Harvey, or at least a day before Hurricane Harvey hit the coast, there was, on social media and Facebook, there was a lot of posts about how it was going to be a Category 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on that same day, ABC 13, I remember specifically, said that that was all fake news, and the hurricane was not going to be that bad. And as we all know, it was Category 4.
Yep.
So my question is, I guess, at what point do you think it is okay to lie to the public for their safety?
Well, how were people safer by being told Category 3 was fake? I mean, I guess I'm not sure I follow the logic of it. In other words, did the local ABC affiliate say it's not going to be Category 3 in order to make people more scared, or I'm just not understanding?
Well, see, the thing about Houston, it's very counterintuitive. I feel like a lot more than 30 people would have died if we tried to evacuate. And any kind of panic about it being, the intensity that it was might have caused, people to flee the city.
You're saying if it was identified as Category 4 from the beginning, then a lot more people would have left, and it might have also caused evacuation orders, and that actually the evacuation itself might have led to more deaths than the hurricane led to.
Yes, kind of like when with that previous hurricane, I can't remember its name, where people drowned in their cars because they were evacuating, but they would have been safer in their homes.
Well, listen, I don't know the answer, Jonathan, in terms of when is it okay to lie to the masses for their own safety, because it's always as someone else perceives is for their own safety. And it's not really the decision to make always, or it's not always the right assessment that's made as to what is to people's safety. I tend to be someone who is favoring honesty and openness over lying and deception. And anytime you hear the government's lying to you for your own good, I kind of resist that logic, although I understand particular situations in which it might be true. So I unfortunately don't have a straight answer for you, although I think it's better for the government not to lie.
Yes. I can see why they did it, but I don't agree.
So you believe that there was actually a concerted lie to keep people there? Like, couldn't it just be that they believed it was going to be Category 3 and it ended up being Category 4?
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's possible that when it was announced as Category 3, that's truly what was believed, and then it strengthened, right? It is possible that that wasn't a lie.
Yes, but they said that ABC 13, they came out on Facebook on a post and said that it was not going to be as bad as it was being stated. Okay.
Well, that I couldn't comment on that. I don't know what ABC 13 did or didn't do, but interesting question, Jonathan. Appreciate it. A lot to think about. Quite a thought exercise, I think is what we could call it. Okay, let's stick with the phones. We'll go next to our caller from the 205 area code. Caller from 205, name, town, and question, please. Caller from 205, can you hear me? No 205, wow. Must have fallen asleep there. All right, well, let's go to 908. Caller from 908, can you hear me? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, I could hear you, David. My name's Isaiah. I'm from New Jersey.
Great. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to call and get your honest assessment on whether or not you think any of the Justice Democrats candidates will win in 2018.
Isaiah, are we on? Do you have us on speakerphone?
No, I have you on my headset.
Oh, okay. All right, because we got a crazy echo. Listen, I have no idea who the Justice Democrats candidates are. Is there one you think is going to win?
I think the one with the best chance, honestly, is Paula Jean Swearengin running against Joe Manchin, just because Joe Manchin is so badly hated. Yeah, I think she could probably win, but I see that they had a big spike after the election, and now they're not getting as much buzz as they used to. So I just wanted to
let me ask you this conceptually, Isaiah. Do you think it's a better investment of funds? And I'm not asking rhetorically. I'm genuinely curious what you think. Is it better to invest money, given that there's a limited amount of money to spend in West Virginia by Democrats? Is it better to invest money primarying a conservative Democrat or trying to win multiple House seats held by Republicans? What do you think it would be better for Democrats if they could do?
That was a big concern of mine too, was that they're not running against any Republicans right now, and I do think it would be better to run against the Republicans.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't know who the Justice Democrats candidates are, but as a general thing, I think if there's an opportunity to knock out a Republican, I would prioritize that over primarying a Democrat. That's just me, though, you know?
It could certainly be possible, too, that the West Virginia primary challenger, the Democrat, defeats Joe Manchin, but then because you've pulled yourself so far to the left, then you lose the Republican in a red state like West Virginia. That can happen, too, because it is a conservative state. All right, Isaiah, sorry I can't say more about it, but I do appreciate the call, and it's very, very interesting, and we will be following all of the primaries and elections. Let's stick with the phones. Let's go to, I don't know, how about the 786 area code? Caller from 786. Who's there? 786, are you with us? No 786. All right. Let's go to a different number. How about our caller from the 832? Let's go to 832. Caller from 832. What's your name and where are you calling from?
My name is Andrew, calling from Houston, Texas.
All right. Andrew, what's on your mind today?
I was browsing through your old episodes, and I was wondering, when are you going to interview Jesse Ventura again? Or someone progressive?
Yeah, the Jesse Ventura interviews have been funny. The thing is, he's kind of off the grid, and by that I mean he lives off the grid. That's his thing now in some part of Mexico, and we don't have any outbound contact info for him. It was always when he had a new book or show, his publicist would get in touch with us. So I don't know how we would get a hold of the guy. I'd be up for having him on, though, for sure. His interviews have always been entertaining.
Yeah, because I really enjoyed that interview. I was also hoping you might interview the Jimmy Dore show. He's also a very progressive guy, so I would love to see y'all two just talk, or with Jesse Ventura.
Yeah, okay. Well, Jimmy Dore, I don't know. Nobody else has suggested that we have Jimmy Dore on, but that, I'm not opposed to having any particular person on if it makes sense. But we will look into everything, Andrew. Everything okay in Houston there?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. All right, Andrew, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Let's see if we can pick up one or two more calls here. Why don't we go to, how about 954? 954 sounds good.
Sure?
Caller from 954. What's your name and where are you calling from? 954, are you there?
I told you.
No, bad idea. You were right, Pat. 954 had trouble written all over it. Let's go to 610. Caller from 610, please tell me.
David, hi.
Hey, is this 954 or 610? Hold on a second.
No, it's a 610.
Oh, and is 954 there as well?
No. That's probably 999. That's my next few numbers.
Okay, got it. Okay, 610. What's your name?
Name's, just call me Dragonborn, and I'm from West Jersey University. Go Rams.
Okay, very good. What's your question?
Listen, I'm sure you know of Dave Rubin and Sargon of Akkad, right?
I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you, them two, and Kyle Klasinski can have like a 2-on-2 debate.
Okay.
and it be moderated by, do you know who Philip DeFranco is?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, have him moderate it, and we can use it as like a fundraiser thing. Because a few years ago, back in 2012, I think it was, Jon Stewart held a fundraiser for autism.
Right.
And as an athlete myself, I think that'd be an amazing thing to do. You know, get two libertarian and two left-wing minds and have them just debate each other over, the controversial stuff, and then, raise money for autism. I think that'd be a great cause.
Okay. Well, listen, we would have to see what the cause should be, but I am willing to entertain this idea. A 2-on-2 debate. Me and Kyle Kaczynski, or Kalinsky, as I know him.
Well, I'm bad at pronunciation.
I'm kidding.
You know him better than I do.
Dave Rubin and Sargon of Akkad, also known as Carl Benjamin. I would probably want to debate him as Carl Benjamin. I don't know that I would want to debate him as Sargon, but moderated by Philip DeFranco. I like the idea.
To be fair, though, Dave Rubin describes himself as a classical liberal.
I've had a few issues with some of them, and I want to see them called out by two people I can respect, and I respect both you and Kyle quite a lot.
Well, listen, we will begin to wait for the phone to ring for that. I am ready for the phone to ring or the email box to light up. Okay, you said Dragonborn is your handle?
Yeah, Dragonborn. Just call me that.
Dragonborn. Okay, well, I've got nothing else to call you, so I guess I have no choice. All right, Dragonborn, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Very, very interesting suggestion. And we will research and explore. All right, that does it for calls. We will take calls again, but we've got a great rest of the show coming up for you today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, for this week's classic interview, we're going to deal with something that it could not possibly be more timely, particularly since we've had, here in Boston, we had another one of these sort of neo-Nazi white supremacist rallies, although the turnout on the neo-Nazi side was embarrassingly low. It still happened here in Boston. We've also had another series of sort of racial incidents around Boston sports, including at the world-famous Fenway Park. And as a result, I want to go back to an interview I did in January of 2015 with Jason Sokol. And the interview was about racism in northeastern American cities. And it's something that I am very familiar with, even though at the state level, you see some of the most progressive policies coming out of New England and New York. There are still other types of racism really ingrained in many ways in cities like Boston and New York. And that's exactly what I spoke with Jason Sokol about back in 2015. And we're going to dive into that interview right now. I'm joined today by Jason Sokol, who's assistant professor of history at the University of New Hampshire, also author of the book All Eyes Are Upon Us, Race and Politics from Boston to Brooklyn, The Conflicted Soul of the Northeast. Let's talk about that conflict. What do you talk about in the book, Jason, that is this conflict when it comes to race and politics in this part of the country?
Well, I argue that in the Northeast, there have basically been two dueling traditions of race relations. On the one hand, the cities and states of the North that I study, Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut, have often leapt ahead of the rest of the nation in terms of being able to forge breakthroughs in interracial democracy and racial equality. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I show how these cities and states have been just as deeply committed to patterns of racial segregation and episodes of racism and racial violence as anywhere else in the country. So those forces have been at war, I argue, throughout the North's history and even up until today.
I find this so fascinating because as someone who grew up in Massachusetts and saw a lot of what you wrote about firsthand, and now living in New York, in Brooklyn actually, see a very different approach that still has these kind of two sides to race relations. I was so interested to read about what you wrote. Let's start a little bit with Massachusetts, because of course sure. Massachusetts has this kind of reputation as this progressive stronghold of forward-looking on race relations, LGBT rights, of course. But at the same time, Boston does have a pretty ugly history of racism and segregation. We see it very much so with sports during the 60s and 70s. And even if you look at Boston, a city that on paper is relatively diverse when it comes to racial demographics, you don't see that in so many parts of Boston because the racial diversity is sort of segregated in particular neighborhoods. Dorchester and South Boston. This was very, very present to me, and so many people I talk to have seen the same things, Jason, that you write about in the book. What other elements of this am I missing in this kind of superficial analysis of Boston?
Well, it's true. Many African Americans for a long time thought of and still think of Boston as a racist place, as a racist city. You know, Bill Russell, on the one hand, was the first African American to coach a basketball team in the NBA. On the other hand, he called Boston a flea market of racism, quote unquote. So it didn't have a good reputation for African Americans. In some ways, it still doesn't. But if you look at, for instance, black politics, Massachusetts has been a place where African Americans have been able to win white votes and to win major offices. I tell the story of Ed Brooke, who was elected as the first African American to be popularly elected to the U.S. Senate ever, and that was from Massachusetts in 1966. I take the story right up to Deval Patrick, elected governor in Massachusetts and then reelected. So I think in some moments, Massachusetts has been able to make good on the lofty history and has shown itself willing to, you know, elect African Americans in a way. You know, 1966, Ed Brooke was elected in Massachusetts. That would have been absurd that any southern state would have elected an African American to the U.S. Senate. So everything you say is true about the deep racial segregation in Boston. It's also true that Boston has been a racist place, exploded in violence over busing. But we shouldn't forget the other tradition in which Boston as a city and Massachusetts as a state has actually been a beacon at moments, small moments, but I argue important ones that we shouldn't forget and that we shouldn't underestimate.
In a review of your book, the Boston Globe said, "All Eyes Are Upon Us" is about the sizable gap between the North's ideals and its reality. Do you think that that's a good way to kind of contextualize why there may be this discrepancy that we see sometimes in the Northeast? The idea that the ideals are very strongly stated and heard by many, but something makes the reality fall short of those ideals. And if so, what do you think is keeping the reality from falling short of the ideals?
Well, I think it's true. And, you know, this is a lot of what we're talking about here is white Americans and their ability or their inability to really commit themselves to what it means to living in an integrated and a racially equal nation. So in terms of the ideals, many white Americans, white Northerners, have always had a commitment to racial integration in the abstract. If you ask them, you know, are you in favor of racial equality and racial justice, they would say, yes, of course I am. And this is what, for instance, Massachusetts residents would say in the 1960s. But then if you ask them, well, are you committed to sending your white student to a school with African Americans, they say, well, you know, it depends what school, depends exactly how that works out. If you ask them, should they be compelled to sell their home to an African American, if that person puts in a bid on their home, they would, you know, in the 1960s, they would have not necessarily said yes. So there's been many white Northerners have had a distinction between what it means to be for equality in the abstract, and then they hesitate to take the steps that are really required to bring that society into being. And so that's what I think is relevant and resonant about the notion of the gap between the ideals and the reality.
So this, I think, gets us pretty smoothly into our discussion about New York City and Brooklyn. And when I moved to New York City from Massachusetts, I was immediately obviously aware of the fact that as you walk around in your regular day, you see exponentially more racial diversity, particularly in Western Massachusetts, where I started my show. There is an almost total lack of racial diversity. You basically just see white people. And initially I thought that speaks so well of New York City. But then once I got beyond this kind of superficial level of I see all sorts of people, you start to realize that as you take a subway from Yankee Stadium, for example, through Manhattan and into Brooklyn, that the racial makeup of that train is initially very diverse and starts to kind of whiten as you go through Manhattan. And then slowly but surely, the white population starts to shrink in relation to who's on the train as you enter and head into Brooklyn, into the outer parts of Brooklyn. So give us a sense of what we really are seeing in New York, where there's this kind of superficial diversity and integration, but we still have pretty significant lines drawn between neighborhoods, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, New York has always been unique, partially because of its size. You know, 7-8 million people packed into the city. And that does allow for an everyday interaction between the races that you don't see in many other places. New York has a reputation from its founding as a melting pot, a multi-ethnic place ever since the Dutch founded it hundreds of years ago. Today, you know, what you see is also a very complex reality. You're right. On the one hand, you have more races in closer proximity in New York than anywhere else. Even the black community itself is complex. You have Caribbean Americans, you have African Americans originally from the South, you have African Americans from New York City itself. But you also have entrenched patterns of spatial and housing segregation, as you say. And this began to take root during the years of World War II, during the years of the Second Great Migration, which was when millions of African Americans came from the South up to northern cities. They settled in New York City. Harlem already had a thriving black community. But for those migrants who didn't end up in Harlem, they were usually corralled into very specific parts of Brooklyn, meaning the neighborhood, what we know of as Bedford-Stuyvesant now, which is still the heart of the black community in Brooklyn. And as you're on your subway train, this is where you see many of the African Americans getting on or getting off, right, in the Bedford-Stuyvesant community.
No question about it, although the amount of gentrification that's happening in Bed-Stuy is also incredible in the last 5 years.
Right. You know, and this is an open question in terms of what's going to happen to the African-American community in Brooklyn up against this gentrification and the growing wealth really everywhere in Brooklyn. But in those years of the 40s and 50s, when African Americans came to Brooklyn and settled in Bed-Stuy, then you had a lot of whites moving out of central Brooklyn and moving to the outer areas that you're talking about, Bay Ridge, Bensonhurst. And those communities became sort of little white villages in the middle of the century. And then you also had a lot of white people starting to move to Long Island and to the suburbs in these same years. And so my book does tell the story of how Brooklyn became racially segregated in this way. The irony is that white people moved to their own exclusive neighborhoods in exactly the same years that they started rooting for Jackie Robinson. So this is another sort of duality, complexity that I show in my book, that on the one hand, the white Brooklynites can welcome Robinson and proclaim themselves to be the frontier of interracial democracy on the one hand, and on the other, they can flee to their own segregated, exclusive neighborhoods where they don't want to have anything to do with African-American families.
Last thing, Jason, in the limited time we have left, if you had to say what the most important or powerful potential truly unifying force when it comes to race relations, not one that creates this kind of superficial openness to racial integration, but one that truly has an impact, what would it be, historically speaking?
Well, I think when communities have committed themselves to integrating their neighborhoods and to integrating their schools, when white people have been willing to make the quote-unquote sacrifice, which isn't actually any sacrifice, I think that's paid real dividends. You know, when communities have committed themselves to low-income and mixed housing, and when school systems have followed through on radical, widespread plans to make sure that their schools had actual mixed makeups, I think those communities have seen positive returns, and they've showed that it can be done. We aren't just fated to a segregated society.
Let me remind everybody, the book is All Eyes Are Upon Us, Race and Politics from Boston to Brooklyn. We've been speaking with the book's author, Professor Jason Sokol from University of New Hampshire. Really great having you on. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let's dive into some audience questions. If you want to submit an audience question, then I invite you to do so, ideally using the contact page at davidpakman.com, but you can tweet it, post it to Facebook. What else is there? You'll figure it out. You can get us the questions. First one is from Betty. Betty says, hey, David, one of the funniest segments I remember you ever doing was weird, funny, or odd reasons that people canceled memberships or wouldn't become members in the first place. It must have been years ago. Can you update that? I actually have some really funny new ones and some that are just kind of disturbing. So here's a funny one. Someone wrote to me not long ago saying, David, I love your show, agree with your politics, appreciate what you do, but I will not become a member because I do not want to support your bachelor lifestyle. I'm your age and I'm married with kids. And there is no reason whatsoever that I, as someone who's married with children, should be taking money out of my pocket and putting it into your pocket to support your bachelor lifestyle.
They just seem jealous.
Well, that aside, it's just like, is the program worth supporting or not? And can you afford it, right? If you have a family and 3 kids, and you can't afford to support independent media, that's okay. I mean, the show is out there for everybody for free. I don't need you to support it. If you have the money to support it, regardless of your family situation, and you find it valuable, then I invite you to make a contribution, become a member, make a Patreon pledge, whatever. But saying merely because of their life situation and my life situation that I'm not married with children, that thus the program is not worth supporting, whatever. I mean, it's fine. Everybody is free to do whatever they want. But it was one of the funkiest ones I've gotten ever.
Especially because it's not like you're living some deplorable lifestyle, you know, and going to be spending the money got from membership in some untoward way, right?
Oh, yeah, with like gilded, I don't even know what things are gilded because I've never bought anything. Gilded glassware.
Trump Towers?
Gilded what?
Trump Towers?
Gilded Trump Towers, exactly right. Okay, so there have been people over the last month or two that have canceled because I don't support Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and I've been clear, I don't support the non-democratic regime of Nicolas Maduro. More common than you might think. I think a handful or maybe even 10 people have canceled because I don't support Nicolas Maduro. As you know, if you've been watching the show or listening for a while, I do not change my political positions in order to obtain or retain members. That sort of defeats the purpose of being independent media. Also, some people wrote to me angrily saying, David, fibromyalgia is real and I have it. And it was so rude when you said it doesn't exist that I'm canceling my membership. And of course, that was a misunderstanding of what I said. What I've said in the past is that there are 8 to 10 conditions that, while they are of course real, many people end up being sort of diagnosed with them when in reality what they have is an emotional issue that is manifesting physically. And I've talked about my history with headaches that were really just stress headaches. And I went down the garden path of figuring out what it is that's going on. Headaches are common. Back pain is a classic. Back pain, people start going down the full garden path. And, oh, you know what? You do have a little bit of a slipped disc here. And that's probably why your back hurts. And you get an operation. And of course, that was never the cause of the back pain in the first place. All fibromyalgia is on the list. I'm not saying these conditions don't exist, and I'm not making a diagnosis of any particular person in our audience. I'm not a doctor. I'm merely talking about there are conditions that tend to manifest in people of particular personalities, and very often those conditions are not actually caused by a physical injury, but rather because of emotion and stress and anxiety that is in someone's life.
It just seems like some people discover the show and start watching for weeks, months on end, and agree with the majority or the vast majority of what we have to say, but then we get to one topic where there's some disagreement, and all of a sudden they're not going to support us as members because
and the thing is,
they just hate us overall.
I could not possibly, let's say I made it the policy, anytime someone threatens to cancel because I took the wrong position on an issue, I will revise my position on that issue. Then someone else will cancel because their position no longer agrees with mine. I mean, it's not a way to run a show. It's just not a way. My view is either you value the existence of the show and you generally believe that the ideas we espouse align with yours and thus you support the program, or you don't. But anybody who's willing to say, I hope that you don't take the wrong position on X or Y issue, you're bound to at some point be disappointed and cancel your membership because that's just not how the program works.
It's always funny when someone writes in saying, yeah, I'll become a member as long as you do like a sports segment or a relationship segment. I mean, we could calculate that out. That just wouldn't be worth it to us. I mean, to change the show entirely and upend the whole thing for one membership.
Can't make decisions that way. No, we don't. And you know what? I think most of the people, 99% of our members, they support us because that's not how we run the show. I truly believe that. Kira wrote in, are there certain things that people take too seriously? You know, I think of everything that happens in middle and high school, 99% of it feels like it's really important for the future of your life. And 10 years later, you'll look back and say, I cannot believe I allowed that to bother me so much. It really didn't matter. So I think a lot of like high school melodrama is something people take too seriously. Now, in adulthood, I think that something people often take too seriously is the impression that others form of you, right? And of course, in work, family, relationships, in society, you can't reasonably be completely disconnected from the way you're perceived in the world, right? If you say, hey, listen, I'm going to, anywhere that I'm legally allowed to be barefoot, I'll be barefoot. There are going to be repercussions that are real to that. But what I mean is, I know a lot of people who are overly focused, even in their mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s, late 30s, early 40s, at almost any age, internally going over what it is that someone else thinks about them because of something that they did. And most of the time, it really doesn't make a difference. And it's just bad for you to be constantly worried about what other people think.
Or just on the other side of the spectrum, too, there's those people who say, I don't care what other people think.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're social beings in the end, and our relationships matter to us. Maybe you don't care so much about what some random stranger thinks of you.
Yep.
But when it comes to like your significant other or your siblings or your parents, of course you care what they think.
Sure. Any others that you have that people take too seriously? What about sports?
Yes. Like there's those like sport debate shows where people get in these passionate arguments about who's going to win the Super Bowl or who's going to win the next boxing match.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, it's just a prediction. I mean, you can, bring some statistics to the conversation or predict based on, past events or what have you, but does it really matter in the end? I don't know. I mean, if it's purely about entertainment, that's fine.
I wasn't thinking so much
level.
The sports analysis shows, but just the idea of people taking sport. Like I really like sports, right? And I've got my teams that I follow. I'm a Boston area sports fan. I follow the Argentinian men's national team, which now is in the middle of playing World Cup qualifiers for the 2018 World Cup. I get it. I like sports. But when I see adults that seem a little bit overly affected by the results of their team, sometimes I wonder if they're fully balanced in life, I guess. And I'm not insulting anybody. It genuinely comes from a place of concern because in the end, the more I've learned about economic issues and political issues and history and climate change and all these different things, I still enjoy watching sports just as much. But the results don't mean nearly as much to me in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, you shouldn't be missing work because your sports team lost the day before. And even to bring this conversation full circle, I mean, what about children's sports leagues?
Oh, parents
so
who go
incredibly
crazy.
Important. Tiger parents making sure that their kids pitch a a no-hitter or just, score the winning run or whatever.
Or argue with other parents or the refs.
Yes.
I mean, that's
crazy.
just, I've gone to a lot of my little sister's soccer games, and there are some parents who seem a little bit too invested, where I wonder what's going on with the parent that they feel the need to be this into in a sort of hyperbolic way, the specific minutia of what's going on in your 10-year-old soccer game. Anyway, those are some ideas. And karaoke. Sometimes people take karaoke a little too seriously. Just throw that one in there. Jim wrote to me, hey, David, what was the most difficult aspect of learning English as a second language for you? Okay, very good question. I did learn English as a second language, but very early on. So I spoke only Spanish until I was about 6 years old. And then I was fully immersed in American English school. And within 3 or 4 months, I had caught up to the English level that everybody in my class had, but yet there were still some things that remained as the difficult thing. So I'll tell you what was difficult for me. It might be different if you're learning English as an adult. Number one, the inconsistent pronunciation of like O-U-G-H,
yes.
Whereas through and tough end in the same way, but are pronounced completely differently.
And you take those letters individually, none of those make those noises.
You basically just have to know the words. And that's similar to Hebrew, which I've learned a little bit. I'm not nearly as proficient as I am in Spanish or English, where you just have to recognize words, especially because Hebrew is written without vowels. So from the context, you have to recognize, oh, this word that might be made up of just 4 consonants, it means one of 2, 3, or 4 different things based on the context and the words around it. So that was really difficult with English. There were some names that were difficult for me. Like I assumed that the name Penelope was Penelope until freshman year of high school, when I finally met someone named Penelope and then saw the name written. I just didn't know. I thought it was Penelope, and I was, of course, sort of wondering, I've never heard that name said out loud, but I keep seeing it written. It must be Penelope. I don't know. So that was difficult, but that's really just more of a what specific culture you're in. And I do think that there are some pronunciation differences, which to a native speaker, now I hear them, but initially I didn't. So for example, the difference between someone's ear and next year, it's a very slight difference for a non-native speaker. And like for my parents, that's still something that they don't really pronounce differently. It's just kind of a blend, whether they're saying someone's ear canal or New Year's Day. They pronounce it the exact same way. Those types of nuances were kind of difficult.
What about just the size of English vocabulary? Because, of course, English is a Germanic language, but it takes a lot from the Romance languages, and, of course, it's affected by the Norman Conquest of 1066 as well.
Naturally.
So, just like in Spanish, for example, the word for problem is what?
Problema.
And the word for issue?
Well, that
Same
depends
thing,
on.
right?
No, it's not.
Aren't they synonyms?
It depends on the situation. It depends on the situation, but it would be a different one.
Okay, well, you're supposed to say the same thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's the same word.
To play along.
Great example.
Because I just think the sheer amount of vocabulary in English is many times over what
and
you have in other
I
languages.
don't know if this is why this happens, but there are books that books that are translated to English. Like for example, Henning Mankell is a now deceased crime fiction writer from Sweden. So I was reading his books translated because I don't read Swedish. I would usually read them in English. But then eventually I said, hey, I should pick up some of these in Spanish just to keep up my Spanish reading. And every single time, the Spanish language translation had significantly more pages than the English language translation.
Okay.
And I wonder, and I don't know the answer, I should ask my mom who teaches Spanish literature and Spanish language, I wonder if the reason for the much longer translation into Spanish is that because English has a larger vocabulary, there are many words and phrases that can be translated more concisely because there might be one word in English to describe that idea,
yes.
Whereas maybe in Spanish you need a few words. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud.
I think that's what it is. And also, I mean, you can't directly translate things. I mean, you put something into Google Translate and have it come out in Spanish, it's going to be a lot longer.
Of course.
But also it's going to be incomprehensible to someone who speaks that language.
Maybe so, yeah. Although Google Translate has gotten pretty good.
You think
it's
so?
really gotten pretty good. Yeah.
There's also so many irregular verb forms in English.
In English there
like
are.
You can't just add, like for past tense, you can't just add ed to every single word.
No.
Sometimes
like that time
broken,
when you told us that you had boughten something, and
yes.
even you as a native speaker of English once made that mistake, and we figured out, no, I bought something. I had bought it. I hadn't boughten it.
It was one of my worst moments, I would say.
Yeah, well, you were also talking about botany. That's, I think, how you covered it, and the audience, I think, for the most part, believed that. Okay, we've got a fantastic bonus show for you today. On the bonus show, we will be talking about how letting kids sleep in could save $9 billion a year. We will talk about zero-waste stores putting consumers on the front line in the fight against packaging. Remember that orange at Whole Foods that was wrapped in saran wrap on a styrofoam tray or something insane? Anyway, we'll rehash that on the bonus show. And also, this is a weird story. Parents reportedly traveled from India to help their son beat his wife. A very, very strange and disturbing story. All of those stories and more on the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership. Get signed up and get instant access.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.